Hello, I'm Dr. Ann Ramsey, and on behalf of Mission College, I'd like to welcome you to our annual Women in Leadership Changing the World Awards. In 2024, we honor three remarkable women who have made contributions in their fields and in their communities. Today, we honor Susan Jen Davis.
I realized early on in my career that I just kept kind of diverting a bit to doing work in what is now called diversity, equity, and inclusion. It wasn't called that then, because I was always seeing spaces that weren't inclusive. Because I remember, I knew how that felt. I watched that all my life, so I was very, very kind of like looking for where I could open up spaces and where I can be kind of an advocate for inclusion and for justice and equity, right? I just didn't know the words at the time.
Valerie Landau.
I've always been driven ever since I was very young by the idea that we could change the world, that we didn't have to live in the world that we were given. We could create a better world. And so that's always been a driving force of mine, and always looking for how can we innovate? How can we change the thing that is blocking people from meeting their full potential, especially those who've not been included.
And Pippa Malgrim.
I remember when I was quite young, in my 20s, sitting down with a very, very prominent ambassador, American ambassador. And I remember he said, which part of the world do you want to specialize in? Are you going to be a Japan specialist or a Europe specialist, Latin America, Africa? And I remember thinking, why do I have to choose? We live on Earth. And again, if you're working for the President of the United States or running a major global corporation, you don't have the luxury of picking one spot. You have to look at the whole darn thing. And I remember actually using that moment to say, no, I'm not going to specialize. I am going to look at the world as one holistic thing. And that was very valuable lesson to learn.
Congratulations. Susan Jen Davis is a highly respected executive and advocate in the areas of sustainability, corporate social responsibility, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. With 30 years of experience in the media and entertainment, telecommunications, and technology industries. Ms. Jen Davis is currently the Social Impact Officer for Al Roker Entertainment and a faculty member for the Center of Creative Leadership. She serves on the boards of several prestigious organizations, including ALO Advisors, the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies, Atari, and the Sustainability Advisory Board of Penn State University's Schmiel School of Business. Most recently, Ms. Jen Davis was a senior executive at Comcast Corporation, where she held several roles during her 15 years with the company. Her most notable achievements include negotiating a historic memorandum of understanding between Comcast and the Asian American and Pacific Islander national community as part of the company's acquisition of NBC Universal, and launching the Comcast Internet Essentials program, which offers affordable high-speed internet access to low-income households. Ms. Jen Davis has a degree in political science from Bryn Mawr and a Juris Doctorate from Penn State University's Dickinson School of Law.
I always begin with the fact that I am a child of immigrants, because everything I have ever done in my life really emanates from that lived experience. My parents came here, did not have any connections in this country. English was a second language. There were cultural hurdles that they had to go against. They experienced discrimination and racism and bigotry. And through that experience, I learned, and in fact, I was required to be an advocate for them and for my family. So my earliest memories in terms of when I was growing up, and I look back and I realize that we're talking about elementary school. They include me going with my father to register my cousin for school. So meeting with the principal and the administrators to get them, registered and ready to start life in America. It included being in meetings with landlords because my uncle and my aunt wanted to rent an apartment and my father had to help them do that. It included reading documents that my father was attempting to navigate for, again, family members. And both my parents were community activists in a fledgling Korean community, Asian community, in a very white town. And they were advocates. So I was an advocate, but I was also watching them as role models, being advocates for themselves and for their family and for the community, the Asian community. This is all I knew growing up. So I think that's where it started. I am a lawyer. I went to law school because I thought that was a natural segue from being an advocate, right? I used those skills, my legal skills, to get into work in advocacy and policymaking in Washington, D.C. firstly. And I realized early on in my career that I just kept kind of diverting a bit to doing work in what is now called diversity, equity, and inclusion. It wasn't called that then, because I was always seeing spaces that weren't inclusive. Then I went into investor relations. I worked for a tech company doing really innovative and creative things. And the second thing I realized about my career is that the way I grew up just allowed me to always see things outside the box, because I was always outside the box. I was always looking in, figuring out a way in, but also understanding the world outside the conventional thinking and the conventional mindset. So from there, I caught the eye of folks at Comcast. And again, they were trying to enter some new markets and new businesses and new products and services. But one thing that I was really proud of, because I kept diverting myself, towards things that weren't exactly my job. And one of them was the opportunity to create a product called Internet Essentials, which is a product today that exists that's serving millions and millions of people who never had internet in their home. Not because they didn't want it or because they didn't value it, but because it was too expensive. So I had the honor and the opportunity to create that low-priced internet product that was about addressing the digital divide. I got to do that. And then finally, I ended up sort of falling into environmental responsibility areas where I worked for an executive who challenged me to create a business plan around sustainability for Comcast. And she said to me, you make the business case. We should be doing this anyway because as an ethical corporation, it's the right thing to do. See, all of these things resonated to me. And then all along the way, I was also looking for ways that I can give back to my community, to the AAPI community. These are things that I, from a value perspective, from a passion perspective, I've cared about since I was a child. And now I'm able as an adult to put my energy into making a big difference. And I'm hoping that I can get other people to join me in a movement about people and about equality and equity and justice, because we can't do it alone. We have to do it as a community. Good leadership starts with this simple proposition, and that is people first. Good leadership is about being people-centric. Leadership is a social process because it involves bringing people together towards a common good. If you're not people-centric and if you don't have people first, you cannot be a good leader. In order to be people first and to be people-centric, you actually have to have connections to one another. Because when you're connected to people, you get to see and hear who they really are. We are all biased, and we all bring our filters and our biases to work every day because of how we grew up, where we grew up, who is in our world, who is not in our world. The enemy of bias is real connections with people, is getting to know real people behind the labels, behind the stereotypes. And then finally, being compassionate. You know, being connected allows you to see the person, but also allows you to feel something for the person, to learn something about that person that you didn't know, and to be a compassionate leader that cares about people deeply. When you do all of that, you're going to get the best out of your team. Today, we do not have equity in the workforce. And when we don't have equity in the workforce, we're not allowing everybody the opportunity to have access to a good job, to good education, to, opportunities in order to be economically empowered. And you're really leaving talent on the table. We are not empowering people. We are not supporting people. We are not sponsoring women along the way and mentoring women so that they are on equal footing with men. And so fundamentally, we want women to advance because it is fair and equitable. And what we have today is inequity. And we need to fight against that in every way we can together in order to create that equity, or it's just going to keep being perpetuated.
Valerie Landau is an award-winning designer, author, documentarian, and educational technologist. Her impact in the realm of online education specifically is undeniable. One of her remarkable achievements includes designing an application that streamlines the analysis and assessment of an organization's effectiveness in achieving its goals at various levels, from courses to entire institutions. She authored the book Developing an Effective Online Course, developed one of the first ever online courses, as well as a faculty training program, and has designed several educational games. Ms. Landau is known for her longtime collaboration with internet pioneer Douglas Engelbart to create technology and processes that could solve complex and urgent problems facing humanity. Together, the pair taught courses on augmenting human intellect and co-founded a company that experimented with new forms of text entry for mobile computing and for people with disabilities. Ms. Landau is a San Francisco native and an alumnus of the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She was an associate professor at Cal State University, Monterey Bay, and the associate director of the Center for Excellence and Innovation and Learning at Sam Merritt University. She currently serves as a strategic advisor at the company she founded, Round World Media, and leads high-level research delegations to Cuba, connecting scientists, academics, doctors, and ecological experts.
I've always been driven ever since I was very young by the idea that we could change the world, that we didn't have to live in the world that we were given. We could create a better world. And so that's always been a driving force of mine, and always looking for how can we innovate? How can we change the thing that is blocking people from meeting their full potential, especially those who've not been included. I went to Nicaragua and I had the honor of working with a phenomenal educator, really revolutionary educator, Paulo Freire from Brazil, who really was one of the main intellectual authors of the idea of education for liberation, right? Education for empowerment, education for inclusion. So that influenced me. And then I worked on the Nicaraguan literacy campaign, which was helping peasants and workers to learn to read, which was at that time about 50% of the people were illiterate. And it was the most successful campaign in the history of the world. When I came back from Nicaragua, I thought, all the peace marches and all the activism that we did in the 60s and 70s, was only effective up to a point, but that what we really needed to do was change the hearts and minds of people. And I guess I followed in the footsteps of my parents and became a documentary filmmaker. And I worked at a local TV station in San Jose. Now it's gone now, but and after we produced a documentary that was about American musicians who went to Nicaragua, traveled to Nicaragua to make a human connection with the people as part of the opposition to the then what was going on were the what known as the Contra Wars in Central America. And so I thought, well, if we could give their message of peace and brotherhood, and that like we don't need to solve our conflict through war, but we can actually have dialogue. That whole episode was very transformational in my life, because then I met the television station hired me to be associate producer for a show about Silicon Valley. I became really immersed in the world of technology, and we met all the leaders of the tech companies. And also one of the things that really took a turn in my life was I also met Doug Engelbart, who was the inventor of the mouse. And I was in my 20s, and he was a very big influence in the idea that we could use technology to overcome the urgent and complex problems facing humanity. And so those have been the biggest, I'd say, influences that impact me to become an advocate for other people and for causes that are about transforming what is into a more inclusive, more equitable, and more just and actually more pleasant world. Good leadership is about people who have an authentic dream or vision about how things should be and how people should be treated. And that a really good leader is somebody who's clear about what the outcomes are going to be, but allow different people to find their own path up the mountain. My passion for innovation has really helped me in my leadership skills, because I'm always looking, like when I approach a problem, I'm never thinking, oh, well, what's in it for me? And here's my vision, but really coming to it with the idea of how can this be better for the most people with the least effort. Big changes are really hard to do because people aren't ready for it. And that's something that I've had to learn that lesson over and over and over and over, and that you really have to lay the foundation, be resilient, take your time, be patient, and spend the time listening to the dreams and concerns of the people that you're working with or that you're working for. We've been living under a patriarchy for a long time, and it's caused a lot of problems that are existential to the existence of humanity, and it's really time we took a new approach. And I think that women leaders have the potential, particularly if they're true to their authentic selves and really working from a place of their heart and their passion, that we really have a chance to change the way we relate to each other and also how we move in the world. So I think that women bring so much to the table, that when you have a woman leader, you have the potential for really having a very fulfilling experience.
Pippa Malmgren is a noted economist who brings clarity to the complex world of global economics. Her expertise includes leadership and innovation, making her a highly sought-after advisor by world leaders, governments, banks, and corporations like Google, Rolls-Royce, and American Express. Dr. Malmgren served as a special assistant to President George W. Bush on the National Economic Council and as part of the president's working groups on corporate governance and financial markets. Before her position at the White House, she served as the deputy head of global strategy at UBS and the global chief currency strategist for Bankers Trust Assessment Management in Asia. Most recently, she advised the British cabinet on trade issues as a board member for the Department of International Trade. Currently, Dr. Malmgren is a lecturer at Sandhurst and in the Duke Fuqua Global Executive MBA program. She's a senior advisor to the Monaco Foundry, which supports impactful startups in Europe, and serves on the advisory board at Streamline Media. Her diverse experience includes co-founding a robotics firm that made award-winning industrial drones, supporting clean tech startups, and authoring numerous bestsellers, The Infinite Leader and The Leadership Lab among them. Dr. Malmgren has a PhD from the London School of Economics and completed the Harvard program on national security.
My parents had a huge influence on it. My father had been an economic advisor to Presidents Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, and Ford. So we just grew up in the middle of politics. And my dad used to always spend time explaining things to me. He would say, you know, there's the front page of the Washington Post story, and then there's what actually happened. And you need to know what actually happened. But he had a way as well of making the world economy so interesting. And then my mom had somehow learned to speak Middle English, as in Chaucerian English, in Los Angeles in the early 1950s. No one can explain this. And so she got a scholarship to Oxford and ended up working very closely with J.R.R. Tolkien as his sort of right-hand person. So she taught me a lot about storytelling. And in the world of economics, everybody tells the story with numbers. But numbers don't really move human beings very much. Stories move human beings. So I think I got the storytelling of this world economy, which normally is presented as this very mathematical, technical thing, but it's really about the human story. So that was the background. And then I somehow got ultimately into the London School of Economics, did a master's and a PhD, and got a job in the City of London. I ended up at one point as the chief currency strategist for a big American investment bank, and then the deputy head of global strategy for the biggest Swiss bank. And I realized that all these people who are managing money are hanging on every word of politicians and policymakers in Washington and the national capitals, and that there was like a language gap. And the language gap was, I just realized I happened to speak both the language of policymakers because of my growing up in DC and my parents, but also the language of traders. And there's huge value in being able to translate and interpret. And from that, strangely, a whole bunch of people who thought they might become their head of government started calling me up saying, can you come brief me? And one of them was George W. Bush when he was governor of Texas. But there have been a number of others. And so I started writing books about the world economy and explaining it in plain English, not dumbing it down, but putting it in a way that a regular person could access the ideas. And then I made a big leap and decided, you know, it's one thing to talk about the world economy, and it's another thing to be part of building it. And so I made a big jump into becoming an entrepreneur. It's been amazing because it's given me this huge view of the world economy, and that's how I got here. Leadership used to be about the leader. and now it's about the ship. It's about how do you take teams of people and bring the best out of them. Often, how do you bring out the gifts that they have that even they don't know they have, right? It's helping people become something that even they hadn't identified yet as a capability or a skill. And authenticity is central to that. Like, people can tell from a mile off whether you have a true vision and true values, or whether, you're just focused on the bottom line, and that's not very inspiring to anybody. There's one angle on leadership that I've been pursuing, and it's a word that I found in a dictionary. I've never heard a human use this word, but I found it to be the perfect word for the true leadership task of our generation, which is cosmopoesis. And what that means is the act of world building. Now, it's one thing to be a leader of an organization or a country or a company, but it's another thing to build a world that others can enter. Steve Jobs, when he created Apple, he said, we don't make computers. We're creating a world where brilliant people will never have to think about their computers. That's cosmopoesis. You are creating a world where others can create. And so I love this concept. I'm working on a book on this right now. I think we need more women, but we also need more feminine. And men have feminine qualities. As well, women, most men and women have masculine and feminine qualities. We draw on them at different times for different purposes. The feminine tends, not always, but tends to be more preoccupied by connection, by community, by how do we bring people together. The masculine tends to be more preoccupied by winning, by getting ahead of the other guy, by going somewhere as well, like achieving an objective. And, so in my career, I've used my masculine qualities frequently during my career to achieve objectives and to win. And I'm not saying those things are not important, but I do think the feminine in policymaking, in business, in communities, it has a very powerful resonance, and the absence of it is a problem. So in that sense, yes, I think we need more women, but we also need more space for the feminine.
Be kind to yourself and fight against perfectionism, because perfectionism is not the goal. Okay, the goal is not to be perfect, because, by the way, it's not possible. So you're actually setting yourself up for failure if you think that you need to be perfect. Second reason that perfectionism is a problem is it actually can keep us from taking risks, because we're not certain that we can be perfect at that next job, at that new opportunity, at that promotion. And so if I were talking to a young Susan, I would say, you don't have to be perfect. Just go for it. Because what's the worst that can happen, right? And what's the best that can happen? The best that can happen is the sky is the limit.
One of the things that you have to include in your plan is, how are you going to be kind, considerate, and always behave ethically, right? Because those are things that are not often taught as part of your plan, but actually those are the thing, because at the end of the day, that's who we are. And that you never know who the people, how people you interact with are going to come back and circle around in your life. I mean, so I think that my message is, behave with integrity all the time.
It's absolutely critical that you follow what makes your heart sing, and you try a lot of different things, because you can't find out what makes your heart sing until you do try a whole bunch of different things. And breadth counts for much more these days. Instead of worrying about the next job, which is what everybody does, think about, what does your ideal world look like? If you could write your own ticket, if you could have anything you wanted, no constraints, and then you will find it's much easier to work backwards from that ideal vision of your future. And then it will define where you're going to spend your time now. And the jobs will just start to come, because once you start doing what is truly authentic and makes your heart sing, everything else follows from that.
Thank you for joining us today as we honor Susan Jen Davis, Valerie Landau, and Pippa Malgrim. 3 remarkable women, like so many women before them, who continue to make a difference in the world.